Americans feel they can relax and laugh at something when it's not too mean or too dark. Brits don't feel like they can relax and laugh at something unless they're assured it's not too positive. Why did the American version of the British show The Office have to stop following the British format after the very first episode? And why do so many Americans not understand Blackadder? Why does this article from 1999 ask fellow Brits the following question? Why don't we love Seinfeld? Seinfeld was a top-rated show in America, it reads. Its final episode attracted American TV's highest ever audience, yet its audience in Britain has been in the range of the more austere art shows. If you guessed that the answer to all of these why questions was humor, then I'm not that impressed because it was in the title of the video. Aside from the general communication differences, humor is one of those areas where the UK and the USA are about as different as you could be. And the ways in which we express humor and the things we find funny are the topics of today's video. Now, this isn't to say that no British person has ever enjoyed an American comedy. Friends, after all, is one of the top-rated American shows here in the UK. And it's not to say that no Americans have ever enjoyed a British comedy. Monty Python, for example, is known by a lot of Americans. But if we zoom out and generalize, as we often do on this channel, the differences become obvious. One of the most popular ways in day-to-day life that Brits will show affection and make jokes is doing something called taking the mick. There are a few different meanings to this phrase, but the more positive one that we're going with today is the idea that someone is making fun of you from a place of humor and because they actually like you. Used in this context, it's not like bullying or making fun of someone that you don't like. Instead, it's joking around with a friend, making jokes at their expense, but in a jesting way. Culturally, this does not translate in the US. Now, after more than 10 years here, my humor is different and my personal brand of humor has always been a bit sarcastic, so I have adapted to and understand and use this type of humor myself, but if you just roll up into some random town in North Carolina and try doing this to someone, you are going to get some strange looks or possibly shot, depending on the town you walk into. This is also a part of what's known as banter. By definition, banter is the playful and friendly exchanging of teasing remarks. It's good-natured. Americans don't really banter, not like Brits do. Banter is typically quick, and it's all about social bonding. In the US, you would typically say compliments to generate goodwill. In the UK, you use jest to do the same thing. It is an adjustment when you first move here to understand that everyone doesn't actually hate you and they're only willing to banter with you or to take the mick when they like you or trust you. If they didn't, they'd just ignore you. Because they're not actually making fun of you to destroy your feelings, but to show you that they accept you and have positive feelings towards you, which is, of course, far too vulnerable a thing in the UK to say out loud. I kid, but only slightly. The next difference on my list is that British humor is just overall darker than American humor. Which brings us to the show The Office. Before we get into what Ricky Gervais has to say about the darkness of the British version of The Office, let's talk about how you can watch both the US and UK version of The Office without needing to be in its country of origin. And that's Surfshark, the sponsor of today's video and the best way to unblock and access websites and streaming services that aren't typically available in your country. Surfshark is a VPN, which stands for Virtual Private Network, which is a fancy way of saying it encrypts your internet traffic and hides your IP address, which is location-based, meaning that you can access over 3,000 of their servers in countries across the globe. Suddenly, you aren't restricted to just watching shows that are available on services in your own country. For example, The British Office is available on BBC iPlayer, which can be restricted access if you're not connecting to the website within the UK. But with Surfshark, no matter where you are, it works seamlessly. And if you're in the UK and want to check out the US version of The Office, there are 7 countries that currently have it as part of their Netflix streaming catalog. Just use Surfshark to connect to one of those servers and there you go. In fact, I used my personal Surfshark account to access a lot of the research for this video as I was watching American and British comedies and needed access to shows from around the world. If you want to try Surfshark for yourself, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee so you can experience what it has to offer with no risk. If you change your mind, you get your money back. Go to surfshark.com/GGL for an extra 4 months of Surfshark at an unbeatable price. Now, Ricky Gervais, who is a British icon and you'll find in the British version of The Office, had an interesting insight into the differences between the British and American version of the show. He says, We had to make Michael Scott a slightly nicer guy with a rosier outlook to life. He could still be childish and insecure and even a bore, but he couldn't be too mean. The irony is, of course, that I think David Brent's dark dissension and eventual redemption made him all the more compelling, but I think that's a lot more palatable in Britain for the reasons already stated. Brits almost expect doom and gloom, so to start off that way but then have a happy ending is an unexpected joy. Network America has to give people a reason to like you, not just a reason to watch you. In Britain, we stop watching things like Big Brother when the villain is evicted. We don't want to watch a bunch of idiots having a good time. We want them to be as miserable as us. America rewards upfront, on-your-sleeve niceness. A perceived wicked streak is somewhat frowned upon. Now, I included the whole quote here because he is so spot on for how I perceive American versus British comedy and why I personally didn't like the British version of The Office when I first watched it. That doom and gloom kind of comedy that he talks about doesn't sell as well in the US. And you can actually see this in all types of television, including the differences between UK and USA soap operas, but that's for another video. British humor is slightly dark. Just the other day, I made a video while I was ill and I showed my inspirational blanket with an inspirational quote on it about going after your dreams. One of the comments made a funny but astute observation, saying something along the lines of the British version of that blanket says, "Don't worry, it all ends soon." Dark humor is much more appreciated in the UK than in the USA, and their comedies show this. Another example would be Fleabag, a UK show that relies on some pretty dark humor. Compare this to American shows like Friends, there's nothing dark about it. It's practically uplifting, and even when things are going wrong, there's that rosy outlook to life that Ricky Gervais is talking about. And Americans like and react to this type of comedy. Americans feel they can relax and laugh at something when it's not too mean or too dark. Brits don't feel like they can relax and laugh at something unless they're assured it's not too positive. And this is why the US version of The Office had to adapt and create its own twist on the show after the first episode. The British version just wouldn't land for an American audience. Another big difference in humor across the pond is what we find funny. British humor often involves cringy or awkward moments as the star of the show. Someone who was watching The In-Betweeners posted on Reddit saying, "How do you Brits watch cringe comedy? I was watching The In-Betweeners and every episode made me want to shrivel up into a ball and die. Is this just normal for you?" And the commenters responded that yes, this is part of it. It's art imitating life. It's funny to see awkward moments happen to someone else, and misfortune can be funny. American comedy, on the other hand, is typically about escapism. The situations that happens to characters usually ends up being more over the top rather than the cringy, true to life situations in a British comedy. When an American watches a British comedy, many times they're left wondering, where's the humor? I just feel awkward, because they're not understanding that that is the humor. Difference 4 on my list has to do with slapstick or physical humor. From as far back as the Three Stooges, Americans love watching someone fall down, get hit by a plank of wood, or engage in some other physical comedy that probably wouldn't happen in real life. Slapstick is one of the types of humor that is the most open and easily understood. It doesn't require nuance. Hence why there's a lot of slapstick comedy in kids' movies, because they can easily understand the joke before they can understand the verbal nuances of verbal jokes. British humor relies much less on slapstick comedy, though of course you can still find it, but it's typically a bit more understated, rather than something like Will Ferrell driving a motorcycle through a house and getting stuck in a wall, which was a scene from an American comedy I just watched the other day. Another difference is what constitutes a joke. When you think of an American comedy, you're often going to think of a sitcom like Friends or Seinfeld. The jokes are based around the one-liners and the punchlines. The length of the joke then is short, and the audience is very aware of when it's over and when to laugh, and sometimes they're helped with a laugh track in the background. Again, it is a more obvious type of humor rather than the British style, which typically has the joke being a long, drawn-out, awkward situation or cringy moment that has laughter throughout. And if there is a one-liner in British comedy, there certainly isn't a laugh track. This is why Americans can often watch a British comedy show and think it's not funny, because they were waiting on the obvious jokes and the specific funny moments to point out, not realizing that the long and drawn-out awkward situation is the joke. For example, Gavin and Stacey, Father Ted, and Only Fools and Horses. Our second to last difference between American and British comedy is all about the sincere nature of American comedy versus the sarcastic and deadpan British humor. In the UK, deadpan or dry humor is all about emotionless delivery, which in turn makes the thing you're joking about funny. It's associated with sarcasm and your face is very blank with no animation. You're not being open with your body language in the delivery that it is in fact a joke. This type of comic delivery is loved in the UK. Truly, I have never met people more skilled at deadpan humor than Brits. But the reason why Americans don't often get this humor is because American jokes and humor are often delivered with emotional sincerity. We're almost laughing along as we say the funny statement to indicate to you that we are in fact joking. Deadpan humor, if not native in your culture, can be very hard to pick up on if you're expecting sincerity. And for you Americans who say, well, I use dry humor, I'm sarcastic, I do deadpan here in America, yes, I believe you, but I guarantee you if you went around in the US with a British level of deadpan humor, you'd have no friends and literally everyone you interacted with would dislike you. Our final difference is the British ability to laugh at themselves as a major form of comedy. Self-deprecation is seen as incredibly funny. Highlighting your own fault and making light of your own failures is hilarious to Brits. There's little room for ego in British humor, and as much as your friend is at the mercy of you taking the mick out of them, you equally make jokes at your own expense to make yourself more approachable and relatable. Americans do self-deprecation a little bit, but in smaller doses than the Brits. Often, if you say something self-deprecating about yourself in the US, you might be met with someone saying something like, "Don't say that about yourself," or trying to make you feel better. Again, an American may feel you're being sincere rather than humorous. It's not culturally seen as a good thing to talk yourself down in the US. Americans are attracted to confidence and this general positive outlook we discussed at the beginning of the video. And self-deprecation as a joke can often fall flat in that sense. Now that does bring me to the end of this video, but before we finish, I also want to point out some food for thought. If you watched my video about communication styles between the UK and the USA, you might remember the differences in a high context and a low context culture. And the idea is that America is a low context culture, which is not a judgment, but instead a way of describing that due to its makeup and history and other cultural factors, people communicate in America in more literal and direct ways than in the UK. They don't rely on hidden meanings. So while it can be easy as Brits to look at American humor and say, well, British humor is clearly more sophisticated. Look at those dumb Americans with their actual laugh tracks. You'd be simplifying the situation, and that's fine. No one's gonna arrest you for that. But actually, American humor in its openness and sincerity works better in a low context culture that is used to a more direct means of communication. So while it might not be right or funny to you, it is right for the culture in which it comes from, which is exactly what I would say to Americans who think British humor isn't funny. It's not funny to you because it doesn't fit in with your culture, but it certainly does in theirs. As for me, my sense of humor has definitely blended. I enjoy deadpan and dry British humor, and I can still laugh at Will Ferrell driving a motorcycle through a house and getting stuck in a wall, so it just means I get to enjoy even more comedy. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you next time.